Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy Beach from Exposure Software. In this demonstration, we're going to take a deep look into converting color landscape images to black and white photos in Exposure. We are using Exposure X6, the latest version of our advanced non-destructive raw photo editor and organizer. I encourage you to ask any questions during the demonstration, and we'll make sure to answer them before the end. Exposure handles your full post-processing workflow. You can use it to copy images from camera cards, apply editing adjustments, creative effects, export finished photos, and even print directly from within Exposure. A little bit of brief history about Exposure is that 15 years ago, Exposure began as a plugin for Adobe Photoshop to help film photographers transition from working in the darkroom with chemicals to editing on the computer, all digitally. So the accurate film emulation presets in Exposure were really just what they needed to start that transition or smooth that transition for them. All right, so let's talk about editing. We have images here from Puja Photography. This is a raw image here. Escape. You can see there's 4 images in this folder. These are all raws. There's been nothing done to them yet. So what we're going to do first is edit the image. Before we convert it over to monochrome, we want to first make basic edits to the original color version. So the new automatic adjustment tools in Exposure are a great way to edit your images quick. They apply optimize edits. So with one click, I just click auto, and we can correct for all these different adjustments here. So we can correct for white balance, exposure, tone. We could correct for dynamic contrast. And on this one in particular, I'm going to include haze level because we have a long perspective here with some atmospheric haze that happens, as you progress away from the lens. Anyway, so I'm going to use haze level on this one. If this was a portrait like the last demonstration that I gave, we did not use haze level because everything was really close. We didn't need it. Anyway, for something like this, I'll include it. And then I just hit enhance, auto enhance. And there we go. So we can hold down the backslash key at any time. I might do that now and again during the demonstration. And that's what I'm using right here. You can see the before and the after. Okay, so let's also, on the basic panel, let's also raise this dynamic contrast slider right here. I could use the regular contrast, but I like what this dynamic contrast does. This is going to make some adjustments, but leave the color values, but keep them from getting overcooked, essentially. There we go. Okay, cool. I'm gonna add a little clarity too, just because. I've actually zoomed in and done this a few times, so just a little bit of clarity looks great on this image. Anyway, okay, so now we have some basic adjustments to our image. This was what it looked like when it came into the computer, and then we made a couple of tweaks to make it pop. So now what we're going to do is let's now convert it over to black and white. Now, before I make that conversion happen, I'm going to take a look at the layers panel. Right here, we can see we have layer 1. I'm going to rename that. Just right click, rename. Auto. There. So now we have auto adjustments, all the things that we just did, on its own layer. Now, the reason that I did that is that I want to be able to apply a preset or a black and white adjustment layer on its own layer so I can make adjustments to that separate to the auto adjustments that I did on the image. There's a method to my madness. Anyway, so we'll open the presets panel here on the left-hand side, and let's go to black and white varieties. We'll just open the top one. Okay, so I have these displayed in list view because I prefer it that way, but you can click the button at the top of the presets panel here to toggle between the different views. So single, that's 2 columns, 3 columns, and then the list. So I like it this way because sometimes the differences between them are really subtle, and I like to be able to pop between them on the large image in the middle. Anyway, I like the extra contrast that these ones give. This one in particular, Fuji Neopan, is one of my favorites. So you can see it has a red or a gold star next to it, which is really kind of yellow, but we'll say gold star just because it sounds rich. Anyway, So what I just did there was messed up on purpose. I clicked Fuji Neopan 1600. So that means that the Fuji Neopan has now been applied to this layer. So if I hover over the thumbnail in the layer panel on the right, you can see all of the adjustments that are there. And at the top, it says Fuji Neopan 1600. So I didn't want that to happen. So I'm going to undo that, Command Z. Now I'm going to come back over to the layers panel. I'll right click and then choose new layer with preset, which puts the Fuji Neopan in its own layer. That's what I wanted. Okay, now I'll close this dock. I don't need that. So let me explain something real quick. And that is when we're converting to black and white. We have something right here at the top that is called the blend base. Now, when this Fuji Neopan is applied, if I turn the opacity of this down, you'll see that it has a pop-up here. And what that pop-up explains is that you really won't see a big difference here. So what we'll do for demonstration is show what a color blend base looks like. So if I want to take the layer opacity of our black and white effect layer, Fuji Neopan, that we just applied, and I want to take the opacity of that down, now with blend base set to color, the black and white preset is just adding this, it blends back in with a color image, right? So if I turn it all the way back up to 100%, then you see 100% of that Fuji Neopan layer. So if I turn it to a black and white blend base, and then I take the layer opacity all the way down, what we see right here is just a straight monochrome version of the original image. So that would be like if you went to the basic panel and you turned the saturation slider, you just drug it all the way down. It just desaturates the image, okay? But we have our Fuji Neopan preset, and that adds some different controls to the black and white processing, okay? I just want to make sure everyone's clear on that. All right, so now we're going to leave it as our black and white blend base because I like the way this is looking right now and I want a black and white image in the end. Okay, so let's, in the color panel here, I'm going to open the color panel. We can see we have the color sensitivity sliders. So if I go back to the auto adjustments layer, which is in, scroll up, it's in color. See, it's a color layer. If I open the Fuji Neopan, it's a black and white layer. Okay, I'm gonna close the basic panel. So on the color panel, color sensitivity sliders is on the black and white layer. If I go to the color layer, those color sensitivity sliders change to our HSL, hue, saturation, and luminance controls. So that's just something fun to point out, that the user interface does change when you go to black and white mode. Okay, color sensitivity sliders enable you to grab a hold of certain values or color values in the image and make them more or less sensitive to light. So in this case, what we'll be able to do is grab a hold of these different ranges and make them brighter or darker. So I'll hold down the backslash key here. And we can see, like, up here in this top bit, we have some of these leaves that are oranges and reds. And when we convert to black and white, they seem to disappear right here into this sky. So I'm going to bring those back by lowering the red's sensitivity, and you'll see that bring that right back in. I'll do the same thing with the oranges. Now I have nice crisp edges on all of that here. And we can see that we had some changes here in the foreground, but I actually like how dark and heavy it is now. So I think that looks great. Another thing that you can do is directly select using the tone selection automatic adjustment tool. So we can click on our color selection tool and then find a tone in the image that if we want to make it darker, like right here, let's say. And then we just click and drag down. You can see the purples and blues sliders are moving as I adjust. See, and you can see that's bringing in the mountains in the background. Okay, that looks great. Okay, a couple of ways that you can adjust the conversion of colors to black and white here. Okay, so let's keep working on our black and white look here. I'm going to add a vignette. Vignette is a great way to draw the viewer's attention to the end of the image. So as we're studying this photo in particular, I want to take a peek here over at the upper left corner. We have some rocks, and these jagged rocks look beautiful, but there's a dark area right on the inside here, and we can see that there's some banding that happens. So what I'm going to do is add a vignette here that will bring this mountain in the background a little bit more. It'll strengthen that, and it will tone these bright highlights down so that the viewer's eye will go right here into the center of the image. That's what I want. Okay, also there's some brightish things over here in this rock that I think would benefit from a vignette. So open the vignette up. See, I started with a plan. That was the reason I went over that. And I'll choose from one of the presets here, just one on the top's fine. I'm going to turn the softness down so that I can make an adjustment and make it look correct. And I'm going to add some more distortion, and you can see how the lumps change when I do this. Okay, I'm going to hit random seed a few times because remember, I'm aiming over in this area where to make this darker. So I'm going to come over. That one might work. There we go. Okay. So now, I have this corner covered. That looks good to me. And this corner covered, and that looks good. So now I'll add some softness here so that we don't. Here's what I'm going to do this the wrong way so that I can tell you what not to do. Okay, so if I do this. Okay. So if I make the vignette like this, you can see that there's some banding that happens. It's very dark, and then it gets a little bit lighter, and then it's dark again. So that really makes it look fake. I mean, really, to me, it makes it stand out. So I don't want that in particular. So I can add some softness to make that not happen until that blends that edge out. You can see it just like that. And then I think that that's still a little bit too strong. So I'll bring that back down. Still too strong. There. Okay. So I can turn the vignette off and on right here with the toggle on the layer or on the panel. There we go. Okay, excellent. That looks good. Next thing we're going to do, actually, the last thing that we're going to do is add some grain. Grain is an integral part to bringing an organic analog look to the image, and it really works great with black and white photography. So on the grain panel, I'll just choose a preset here. For black and white images, usually super fat grain, salt and pepper grain, these are stronger looks. I'll just use regular grain at 50%. So usually the really strong or super fat grain, I usually tend to use those when I'm doing edits on like a gritty urban landscape or street photography or even like a dark, moody portrait. I'll use bigger, fatter grain, but on black and white images like this, I think the subtle, small grain looks really nice, works really well with it. So when you're making adjustments to grain, the best thing to do is to zoom in to at least 100%, which is, I believe, what we are right there. Now let's go to a place that has shadows and highlights. Here we go. Okay, so we can see that we have our grain set at 50%, which we really can't see in the image. So I'm just going to turn it up temporarily so that we can see the grain. Now we can control the amount and where it shows up in the image, just like with real analog film. And so I don't particularly care for a lot of grain in the midtone, so I usually turn that down. And then I'll also turn it lower in the shadows, but I'll bring it a little bit higher in the highlights. Now remember, this grain is super strong right now, so I'm going to tone that down, but you can see it right here. Okay, so another thing is about the size of these grain clusters. Like these aren't individual grains, they're grain clusters. That's what you're seeing when you look at grain, the little chunky bits. Anyway, the size of that, again, with street photography, I like to go more toward the fatter, chunky grain, but for a landscape like this one, I think finer grain, and there are some other additional options here for finer grain types. This is 50 millimeter, and this is, right? Yeah, 35, 50, and then there's a 4x5 viewfinder. So the grain in the 4x5 film is very, very fine. You can barely see it right now, even though it's very strong. And then 35 or 50 millimeter right here, 120 film, it's still very small compared to 35 millimeter film. You can see the difference there. So I'm going to leave it at 120. It's a nice way to add that organic feel, but not have it be overpowering. And for, you know, nice landscape that you want to look at for a long time, it's really, really nice. Nice touch. There we go. Okay, so that concludes our demonstration. I do want to point out something here that is under the help menu, the manual, the exposure owner's manual is there. It's an online document. You can select it right here, and it's a great way for you to find detailed instructions on operating exposure. It's a quick and easy place to find answers for any questions you may have about using the product effectively. So now I would turn our time over to answering some questions, but I don't see any. So I'll make a few comments and then we'll close up. That is that I encourage you to get in contact with other exposure users if you would like to do that, to swap editing methods and presets and etc. Go to our Facebook group, the Exposure Users Facebook group. If you would like to share your work with us and other exposure users, we encourage you to do so. So post your work to Instagram and use our hashtag #MyExposureEdit. That does have 2 E's in it, my exposure, and then another E for edit. Yeah. Thanks for your interest in exposure, everyone. And until next time, this is Jimmy Beach.